Hello, my name is Gary Scudder. I'm a professor here in the core division. Today I am ably assisted by the excellent Kelly Thomas, who, well, we won't get into what a mess she made of this, but so we're going to do, I want to talk about an assignment that I do in Core 110, but also Core 220. But even more in Core 270. Essentially, it's looking at a poem, and it's kind of a little cheesy trick that I do with my students, and I've used it over the years many times. Essentially, what I do is I take a poem from the brilliant Greek lyric poet Sappho, and I have the students analyze it, but I give them absolutely no context whatsoever. And I'll show you how I handle this. So what I want to do is we're going to pan around and we'll walk through the poem first. Excellent. This is the actual PowerPoint that I use when I show the students. The poem, I mean, a lot of Sappho's poems don't actually have titles per se, but they tend to sometimes just be known by the first line of the poem. So I will walk you through the poem, which is pretty short, but again, keep in mind that when I show the students this, and I do this in 110 and sometimes in 220, but more likely in 270, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, I give them nothing else other than this. So here's the poem. He is more than a hero. He is a god in my eyes. The man who is allowed to sit beside you. He who listens intimately to the sweet murmur of your voice, the enticing laughter that makes my own heart beat fast. If I meet you suddenly, I can't speak. My tongue is broken. A thin flame runs under my skin. Seeing nothing, hearing only my own ears drumming, I drip with sweat. Trembling shakes my body and I turn paler than dry grass. At such times, death isn't far from me. And we go through the poem once and then we go through it twice. And then I ask the students, okay, what do you think is going on here? And they give me a little bit of response. And they tend to think it's just kind of a sad crush love poem. And they go on about this. I go explain it to me, and they'll walk me through it. They'll say it's clearly some guy who is like crazy in love with some girl, but she already has a dude, so consequently he's really sad. Blah 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 blah. And they sort of go through this a little bit, and I try to push them a little bit. I said, well, could there be a deeper meaning? You can always tell the brighter students or the students who read more immediately get there's a real erotic subtext to this that they latch onto pretty quickly. And the other students just go, oh no, they just seem really sad. But the other students are like, no, I think there's something going on. And especially that line at the end, at such times death isn't far from me. And we tend to talk about that French word petite mort, the little death or orgasm, and the students are like, ooh. So they sort of realize there's something else going on. But I say, well, is there anything that you don't know about this poem that might help you understand it? And inevitably, one of the students will say, well, who wrote it? And I will say, well, Sappho. Now, some of the students know who Sappho is, some do not. If I think the students are a bit too clever, I will throw them off. Like, I will pretend to make a clumsy mistake. I'll go, Sappho is a really good Japanese name. And I'll do like, oh, I'm sorry. And the students are like, wait, I thought I knew that. So it's a really clumsy trick, but they always fall for it, which is brilliant. And then we go through it again, and eventually some of the students who actually know who Sappho is point out that she is, among other things, a very famous female poet from ancient Greece. And we get into this discussion about her. We talk about the notion she grew up on the island of Lesbos. So the term lesbian comes from, Sapphic comes from Sappho. And then we go through the poem again. And I'll say, does this change your perception of it? And suddenly they go through it. And what's interesting is the number of students who will suddenly go, oh, wow, I suddenly feel I understand this more. And one of the things I always ask them is, okay, now take a step back. Is the poem more powerful now, or does it really matter? And the students will often say that they actually find it more powerful and more sad, simply because it is a woman writing about another woman. And the hero is a man because he can literally sit next to her. Not simply because that's her official boyfriend, but because for the Greeks, even though they were perfectly okay with male homosexual relationships, frowned upon female homosexual relationships. So literally, you suddenly have this huge cultural boundary there, the societal norm that they didn't really know exist, and the poem suddenly becomes much more profound, much more sad than they ever thought of before. But then we come back and talk a little bit about the fact that, but also, are we also, by knowing this, are we also in fact imposing an order on the poem? Are we forcing you to read this poem a certain way because now you know this about the author? Because does it really matter? Because is the poem really, despite the strong sort of erotic subtext to it, is the poem really about sadness and longing which transcend gender? And if we get so caught up on the fact of Sappho's sexuality, which truthfully we still argue about today because we don't know that much about it, are we essentially imposing meaning and missing a far more profound discussion about love and desire and loss? So again, let's read the poem again, just thinking about this line. He is more than a hero, he is a god in my eyes, the man who's allowed to sit beside you. He who listens intimately to the sweet murmur of your voice, the enticing laughter that makes my own heart beat fast. If I meet you suddenly, I can't speak, my tongue is broken, a thin flame runs under my skin. Seeing nothing, hearing only my own ears drumming, I drip with sweat, trembling shakes my body, and I turn paler than dry grass. At such times, death isn't far from me. So on the one hand, the very fact that you now know who Sappho is, and the societal limitations that she faced, I think does make the poem more powerful. But it can also sort of lead us astray, and we miss some other aspects to it. We get too caught up in sort of purient discussion about who Sappho was, and miss out on the fact that above everything else, she's one of the world's first great lyric poets. Now we could swing back around again. Okay, thank you. I do this in 110 because I think it's just one of those really good poems that teaches a freshman something, because they're fresh off the farm and they're coming here to Champlain, and this is a poem where you go like, okay, this is the type we do in college. We're always going to be digging a lot deeper than you're used to, and we talk about when we, especially the Linden stuff about perception and how you know reality at all. I use it in 270 a lot. And that's the Heroines and Heroes class. When we talk about things like structuralism, I mean, this is a classic sort of deal where the structure of all the different structures that pertain to the life of Sappho really impact the meaning of the poem. And you can't truly understand the poem unless you understand homoeroticism in Greece, lyric poetry in Greece, for that matter, the whole structure of literature in Greece. Essential. But then we revisit it when we talk about feminist literary criticism. And then we revisit it once again when we talk about lesbian gay literary criticism. And look at the same poem 3 different times along the way and talk about whether or not we're actually learning something different every time. But again, always going back to the notion of, is this the dangerous side to any kind of literary theory, or any kind of theory is, it's very valuable, but maybe it also takes you in a direction and is sort of self-imposing. So anyway, I've used this a lot. It's worked very well. As always, if anyone would like to talk about this or anything else, drop me a line. Thank you.